There's really amazing research, and I don't think enough people know about this, that we are taught that once we're successful, we will be happy. But again and again, the research shows that it's actually the other way around. We are successful once we are happy.
Triggering content warning. This episode discusses mental health and suicide. If you're struggling, please call or text 988 for support.
Welcome to Success Reimagined. I am Dr. Amna Shabbir, your host on this journey to thrive at the intersection of ambition and wellness. In every episode, I'll help you challenge outdated definitions of success, discover practical tools and strategies for growth without compromising your well-being. I am so glad you've joined me. Let's reimagine what's possible together.
Dr. Carrie Adair is a social psychologist and former assistant director at the Duke Center for Healthcare Safety and Quality, where she led efforts to combat healthcare worker burnout and enhance resilience. With a PhD from UNC Chapel Hill, her expertise lies in the science of well-being, institutional strategies for burnout prevention, and evidence-based tools to foster sustainable workplace cultures. Now working beyond Duke, Dr. Adair continues her mission to advance well-being in high-stress environments. Welcome, Dr. Adair.
Thank you, Amna. It's a joy to be with you.
We met at Duke initially, virtually though, but I was so impacted by the talks that you gave. And the first talk that I heard was one that you gave on self-compassion. And here we are jumping into this conversation on perfectionism. So before I pick your brain as this incredibly amazing psychologist, I want to draw attention to the fact, and I ask everybody this question, do you consider yourself a perfectionist?
Yes, I sure do. So it is an ongoing battle, I guess you could say, or focus of mine, because I've noticed that being a perfectionist really hasn't helped me. And in fact, it's kind of robbing me from being happy or noticing joy in the moment, because I'm often thinking, is this the most perfect it could be? Could I have done something for it to be even more perfect, right? This always striving. And so it's really driven a sort of a self-critical voice that I walk around with, always kind of comparing and analyzing, how am I doing? How is this going? And I just don't really want to live my life like that. I think most people don't either, but we become unaware of it because it is such a value that our society has to continue to strive and push ourselves and go forward. So I'm trying to be more accepting and in the moment, but it is a continual battle. In fact, I'm working on getting my daughter's 5th birthday party together, and I'm noticing my perfectionist tendencies coming through even as I prepare a 5-year-old birthday party. So again, it's an ongoing thing for me.
It's an ongoing struggle. I completely agree with you on that. And you also mentioned that it's a little sneaky. You don't even realize that you are actually leaning into those tendencies. During this process, I've talked to many people in terms of their interpretation of what perfectionism is. So for what I'm gathering from you is that it's not helpful for you. You are noticing it play out and really robbing joy from something as wonderful as you would, a little birthday party. And I find myself at a very simple intersection of the same issue as we record this conversation. How do you define perfectionism? Like, what does this word mean to you?
Yeah, so perfectionism is really this intense striving, this extreme achievement motivation where we are oftentimes really comparing ourselves to others. How am I doing? How am I on that ladder of success? And of course, it can come from many different places. So we think that it is to some degree inheritable. So we could be predisposed to having this way of thinking and being, but it is more so cultural or environmental. So what are the situations we're in? Who are we around? Are they also perfectionists? Is there this sort of extreme focus on achievement and success? And when we look at our society today, there is this very heightened level of pressure to succeed, to be at the top of our game. And I think especially for folks in healthcare, there is a very sort of understandable but unfortunate way this is played out, where We need to be perfect all the time, and yet we are also human. And while that striving for perfection makes perfect sense and we should be achievement oriented, it actually leads to more errors and lower patient satisfaction, higher rates of burnout, more mental health issues for providers, depression, possibly suicidal ideation or self-harm. And so there really is a lot of negatives from this perspective.
That was covering a lot of like really important points that you mentioned over there in terms of this is going to affect mental health across the board, and that includes burnout. And yet we're clinging on to it as a form of this shiny metal that we have to share with others, and that it is our favorite flaw. It is one of the things that I pride myself in, and not recognizing what a struggle it can be. You mentioned burnout there. When you kind of dig deeper into talking about burnout, talking about organizational well-being, and we are talking about medicine, for example, how do these two things correlate when we talk about perfectionism and burnout?
In perfectionism, there's this striving for achievement and making sure that everything we are doing is as good as it possibly can be, that it is perfect. And the reality is that we are human and we are not always going to be perfect. And so in those instances, whether they are real or they are sort of perceived by ourselves, maybe no one else would notice whatever flaw you are perceiving, we have that self-critical voice, we beat ourselves up, we tell ourselves horrible things about ourselves. Maybe it comes down to something, really personal or things we were told when we were children. And all of these can really lead to shame, lead to depression, lead to burnout, lead to these outcomes that are increasing in healthcare workers and that we need to be paying close attention to, not only because we care about healthcare workers as humans, but also because they are associated with higher levels of errors, lower patient satisfaction, and other negative outcomes in the workplace.
And we don't want those things. And yet you're saying we also want our healthcare workers, and even in non-healthcare settings, the people that are in our workspaces, to be perfect. And that is like that other-oriented perfectionism, the expectation that people around us are going to be perfect. So as you were thinking about workplace culture, and clearly this is not working, what are some of the steps, in your opinion, that maybe organizations can take to address the harmful impacts of perfectionism while still encouraging excellence and accountability?
So there are many things that we can do. I think one of the potentially most harmful approaches is to put out there to everyone that no errors are accepted, right? That the extremely high level of intolerance to imperfection, that is very dangerous, because what happens when there is an error, and we are human and there will be an error, what we do next is really important. But when we set that expectation at the front that there's intolerance for that, how does that individual react? There's intense shame. There's potentially self-harm or other negative behaviors or outcomes. There's potential substance abuse or higher rates of accidents, et cetera, after these types of issues. So we need to put out at the front more of a supportive environment, one that is a learning opportunity, setting up cultures not only from the institutional level, but locally, where we rather view these types of situations as learning opportunities, using that learning mindset so that it's not less about that one individual and more about the fact that we are all human. We are all capable of making errors. And how can we set ourselves up for success so that those can be avoided, right? Rather than playing the blame and shame game. And shame is a very corrosive emotion because it does lead to all sorts of other negative outcomes as well. We want to make it about being human, make it about setting ourselves up well for the future. So how can we do that? So one is having supportive leaders that are not intolerant. They are more accepting of humanity, our common humanity. And that's not at the expense of high expectations or, really being oriented towards success and positive outcomes, but also using some humility. When leaders can share that they made a mistake and sharing how they grew from it, that is so powerful. Opening the door to the fact that we are not robots, right? We have so much to offer, and yet we can also appreciate the fact that we are human at the same time. So making it at the local level, making it part of the culture that this is a learning environment, and then taking that even further to the institutional level. We want to make sure that we also don't set up individuals to experience a negative outcome from this is a sort of controversial term, but a second victim or an individual who is sort of traumatized themselves from an incident. We did some research on this and found that for individuals who feel that the institution is supportive to them and supportive in these types of instances, there were significantly lower rates of burnout, of other negative mental health outcomes, but also higher rates of patient safety culture. So we know that actually when we have this sort of feeling of support from the institution, feeling of support from the leader, feeling of support from my colleagues, we're set up so that we are more likely to bounce back when adversity or a mistake does arise.
That was really helpful. And what stood out to me at the end, as you mentioned, is this culture of almost like belonging and mattering, which really ties nicely with some of the incredible work that even Jennifer Wallace has done. And as you talk about that specifically, I also joke sometimes that people don't leave organizations because they have to do 3 extra clicks. They leave organizations because they feel like they don't belong and what they're doing doesn't matter to the people. So as we talk about modeling humanity on a deeper level, and we talk about modeling that it's okay to make mistakes, and more importantly, what are we going to do when those mistakes actually happen? Are there any examples that come to your mind as we talk about making this tangible? Because here's a concern that I have. When I'm talking about behavior change, I'm talking about self-compassion, even things that appear to the general public as so meta. What are you talking about right now, Amna? How are we actually going to be able to apply this? So if there is, for example, a leader in healthcare listening to this, a leader in another organization listening to this, and they're thinking, how can I start showing a healthy way surrounding this narrative that we have to be perfect? What would you say?
I would say, I think it starts with ourselves because we can all help shift this culture away from being one that is so focused on unrealistic expectations. I think we can sort of model this humility and humanity to other people. I think especially leaders, because they have an outsized role in shifting the culture. So bringing this humanity into our behaviors, making open communication safer, that psychological safety becoming a part. We've done more research on psychological safety and just how important that is, not only in our workplaces, especially in healthcare. We know this is extremely important to have psychological safety, but also in our friendships, in our relationships across the board, so that we do feel like, okay, those folks are experiencing the same types of struggle that I'm experiencing. I don't have to hide my inadequacies or this thing that I did that I'm embarrassed about. So we also can appreciate the role that social media has played in the uptick of perfectionism. So knowing that these beautiful, successful, perfect lives of the people, on our phones or in social media, they're not perfect, right? Behind that photo might be all sorts of difficulties and mistakes that individual had. So again, really shifting our expectations for perfectionism and what does a happy life look like for me? I'll also share there's really amazing research, and I don't think enough people know about this, that we are taught that once we're successful, we will be happy. But again and again, the research shows that it's actually the other way around. We are successful once we are happy. And so rather than constantly striving for more and more and more success, which we think we're sacrificing for, we think, this is so rough, but I'm going to sacrifice for it. And someday when I'm successful, then I'll be happy. It actually does the opposite. And so we need to appreciate in the moment what we are experiencing in order to not get caught in this perfectionistic cycle that actually deprives us from the very thing that we are seeking to experience.
That was so powerful and so beautifully articulated in terms of success and the research surrounding that. Thank you. Absolutely. I want to shift focus for just a minute. And because the first time that I connected with you was I heard you talk about self-compassion. And we think about perfectionism. And in fact, it was one of those aha moments for me personally. And you're talking about this thing called self-compassion. And I am a fellow at that time. I'm just listening. I'm listening. And before that, people had introduced the concept of self-compassion in my life, and I had absolutely rolled my eyes at them. And I still openly and publicly say that. And I really suffered from a lack of self-compassion, extremely high self-criticism. Where does like perfectionism and self-compassion show up in terms of things that are helpful? Is there some correlation in terms of benefit? Your thoughts on it?
Excellent question. This is so important because, yes, self-compassion has a sort of touchy-feely connotation, but really what it is being more understanding toward yourself, speaking to yourself the way a good friend would, right? You made a mistake. What do you say in your head to yourself? You're probably berating yourself, beating yourself up. Your friend, hopefully, would not be so harsh to yourself. So it is not necessarily about giving yourself a pass or going easy on yourself. It is truly about, let's be realistic in the situation. How did you do? And so I think self-compassion, it has a bit of a PR problem, as does mindfulness at this stage, but it really is it's about three things. It's about this sort of self-kindness, being kind to yourself rather than beating yourself up, being more understanding to yourself. It is about being mindful, so you can even in the first place become aware that you are beating yourself up or that you're just going through a tough time and you might need to give yourself, a little bit extra understanding or do something that feels good or is soothing to yourself. How can you treat yourself a little bit better? And finally, a common humanity. And I think this piece, all three of these pieces play a role for us in sort of managing or approaching perfectionism, because it really does speak to this cultural or environmental aspect, is noticing that I made a mistake or I might not be perfect, but neither is anyone else, right? So I am part of this common human experience where we are not perfect. And I'm going through something that probably the vast majority of people in my position went through as well. And I think this is so important, especially for trainees, folks in grad school. I know I went through this in grad school where I was very intimidated, a lot of imposter syndrome. This is when my perfectionism really took off. I would spend hours and hours checking and rechecking my tables, right? So this is research, so I'm so hyper-focused on it being perfect, 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 making sure my sentences are perfect, and comparing myself to my fellow grad students. Keep in mind that when we are going up the achievement ladder, we are comparing ourselves to different pools of people, right? We might have been at the top of our class in high school or college. And then as we, get into these other programs, we're also comparing ourselves to the other tops of their class folks. So it causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of hyper perfectionism. And so using that common humanity is key. And I'll say, can we share these notions of common humanity? There was a day in grad school as I'm trying to, feel like I belong. Speaking of belonging, we're in the lab and it comes out that actually the other grad students are feeling inadequate or they're feeling like imposters or they, not good enough all the time. It was this huge aha moment for me. Oh my goodness, all of these folks who I admire and I think are amazing, they feel this way? Wow, okay. Maybe it's okay that I feel this way too. Maybe it's not the case that I'm not meant to be here. Maybe it's all going to be all right. So again, those aspects of self-compassion, all three of them can really help us in terms of accepting who we are and healing in the face of these really high and in many times unrealistic expectations.
Absolutely. And I was also trying to picture myself in various stages. Like it just comes to your mind, when you're talking about, I felt like an imposter. And one of the reasons why I am having these conversations and working on all of this is because I feel that on some level, we know that I probably shouldn't be that awful to myself. And maybe other people are struggling. But there seems to be this almost a gap because, as you mentioned earlier, what you're being shown on social media, a lot of times it doesn't add up. And sometimes you're also being thrust into this like relentless drive to be positive, which also doesn't help. So you find yourself in this odd space, wondering, what do I need to do for my well-being? What do I need to do to heal from this perfectionistic space? And part of the healing process sometimes is to look at another human. And this whole conversation has been so helpful when we talk about common humanity, when we talk about shared lived experiences as other grad students who are in these extremely intense environments. As you mentioned, your personal struggles can see and relate.
Yeah, I think hearing these stories is invaluable, right? Like almost everyone, if not everyone, goes through them. And you don't have to be in these sort of high stakes, high expectation, these training programs to experience it. It's almost ubiquitous in society these days, especially with social media. And so I think really being aware of it is key, but also sort of shifting the narrative. I do on occasion see, a video or a post from someone who's like, let's be real. This is life right now. And those can be kind of useful for this aha of what are our expectations? What are we putting out there? Are we contributing to this notion that might make someone else possibly feel less than? Or how can we be, again, sort of sharing this notion of common humanity?
Absolutely. And I'm laughing because, yeah, we all love those videos, and my algorithm knows by now that those are the ones that I like to watch. My favorite ones, I don't know about you, are all the ones in which we talk about mom fails and parenting fails and a little fun humor spin on when it comes to mom guilt.
Oh yeah. I love the making it sort of both humorous, but really real, those tough moments, and just allowing ourselves with the space of we're really trying. This is hard. So yeah, I agree.
This has been fantastic. And as we look towards wrapping up our conversation today, which I really don't want to because you have such incredible insights to share, I would invite you to just zoom out all the way away from healthcare, away from organizations in specific, and you're just looking at society, maybe the earth. We're just looking at the aerial view of the earth at this point, and you're thinking about this issue that's causing so much pain, which is perfectionism. We mentioned a few things. How would you organize, in your opinion, like what would be a great antidote that we could potentially maybe just throw if we could just spray it out from space, from the atmosphere, just lands on everyone? What do you think are like great steps that we can take that are potential antidotes towards perfectionism?
That is such a important question, $1 million question. And it is a tricky one to solve because we are truly seeped in this culture of perfectionism. It is ubiquitous, truly. We're constantly striving and striving and striving, and it feeds upon itself. And as we notice other people striving, right, we experience it as well. So I will say too, tricky in this is that it can start at a very early age, right? So it might be the way our parents talk to us, right? Were they setting unrealistic expectations, or were they sort of imbuing these perfectionistic tendencies, maybe expecting us to be perfect? So we're constantly playing this race towards perfectionism and finding ourselves falling short. What do our parents say to us when we fall short? And we internalize these voices and these reactions, and it can impact our thought processes and the way we treat ourselves our entire lives. Now, that's not necessarily the experience everyone has. I personally really saw this uptick in perfectionism in the culture of grad school, right? Very achievement oriented. I believe many folks in healthcare experience this as well. But just getting at this notion of how difficult it might be to shift this notion. But it is completely possible to change this way of operating, change this critical voice, this perfectionist voice in our minds. I'll go back to what you said, which is not a huge fan of the word, but I truly do think that self-compassion is a huge part of healing from this because it allows us to simply be more reasonable to ourselves, be kinder to ourselves, to notice in the first place when we are overstriving or when we are setting an unrealistic expectation. I think many times we set these expectations because we're told we're supposed to set them very high, right? But then when we fail to potentially achieve them, we beat ourselves up and forget that, oh, actually, that was set very high in the first place. So using this aspect of mindfulness, which is a component of self-compassion, so that we can become aware when we are being a perfectionist or overly self-critical, that's key, right? Being in the moment again. This notion of self-kindness. So when we are experiencing this, can we just, again, speak to ourselves the way a good friend would speak to us? And then this common humanity. How can we recognize that, I'm human. I'm not always going to be perfect. No one else is always going to be perfect, right? We are all human. Can we be more accepting of that aspect of what it means to be alive? So those, I think, are the keys towards moving to a healthier place when it comes to perfectionism.
Thank you so much for your valuable insights today, Dr. Adair. This has been wonderful, and I think this might be the perfect moment to pause this conversation on perfectionism. How can folks get in contact with you and learn more about your amazing work?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to connect with folks. They can reach out to me via LinkedIn. It's Carrie Adair at LinkedIn. So come find me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
This episode is part of a special series in my budding book project on unmasking perfectionism.
You might believe you don't have the time or energy to focus on yourself, but this is exactly the right time to get serious about your well-being. You don't have to do it all alone. I'm here to help. If you enjoyed this video and are ready to take the next step, head over to dramnashabir.com where you'll find free resources you can access right away. The website link is below. Let's get started on your path to thriving.
Thanks so much for spending time with me today. Just a quick reminder, while I am a physician, I'm not your physician, and nothing in this podcast is medical advice or any kind of professional advice. Everything shared here is based on my personal experiences, and the views expressed are entirely my own. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love for you to rate, review, subscribe, and share the show with anyone who might need a little inspiration to redefine their own version of success. I'll see you next time. Until then, keep reimagining success one small step at a time.